Hi, everybody. Sid Walker here, and welcome to our webinar today. And this is, you could call it a preview to my coaching program called Selling Without Wrestling. The subtitle is How to Have a 90% Closing Ratio and an Abundance of Quality Referrals Without Being Pushy or Controlling. So that's a mouthful, but that's what I've been doing for years here. And I'm going to show you the website here in a second, but that's sellingwithoutwrestling.com, which is currently free, and I'll show you that in a second as well. So our title today, How to Make $1 Million Annually with the Low-Key Sales Approach. That's been my thing for a long time. Is I've created some of the biggest people in the financial services business. I mean, I've coached lots of different kinds of people, but my specialty has always been financial advisors. So I've created some of the biggest people in the business, and with this approach, and I'm going to give you a key aspect of that today. So what we're going to cover, basically, I'm going to start out and give you a little bit of my usual. You've got two approaches to selling. You got relationship builders and client controllers, and the rules for success are different. We'll get into that a little bit. And then most important, how the ego holds us back from reaching our real potential and how to stop the self-sabotage and other negative distractions of the ego. I've always been really a peak performance coach, so I'm an expert on the psychological part of getting the barriers out of the way. And then the second part of that is why learning to be more intuitive is the fastest way to increase your production. And some baby steps on how to be more intuitive. Everybody is more intuitive than you think. So we'll point some of that out. All right. So let's see if I can go to my next slide here. Okay. So how to get the most out of today? Keep an open mind. Oh, actually, let me know. Let me know you can hear me. Just in your question box there. Just I want to make sure I'm not just talking to myself here, which I've done before. There we go. All right. Thank you, folks. There, we're getting lots of responses. Okay. So how to get the most out of this? Keep an open mind. My perspective's a little different. Like I said, I'm the champion of the low-key approach. I've got a proven knack for taking some of the most gentle, soft-spoken people and making them highly successful in sales. Again, mostly intangible. I actually worked with a few people I worked with a number of people doing tangible sales as well. But mostly intangible for me. And so, no more thinking you got to be pushy or controlling to make it big. I mean, you can be super low key and be a top producer in really any kind of product. Like I said, I've created some of the biggest producers in the financial services business with the low key approach. Those people would never go back to what they were doing before. Most of them have a 90% or better closing ratio without using any sales technique whatsoever. That's one of my claims to fame. And, I've been a coach for 40 years, probably 38 officially, but, a couple years before that, I was doing some training. I started out in the life insurance business right out of college for 5 years back in the 70s. And then I had Fortune 500 clients before I was 30 doing executive outplacement. I got certified to be a coach in 82 by Dr. Cherie Carter Scott, who's considered the mother of coaching. So this has been a long road for me. I've been doing this really all my life. Everything I talk about is highly tested, highly proven, thousands of clients, and I personally use or have used everything I talk about. So this is not a bunch of theories about what should work or what could work. This is all based on experience. And my promise to you today is what I'm going to talk about today is easier, more fun, and will result in more success than what most of you are doing now. And I've got lots of resources. A lot of my stuff is free. I have a huge website called the Selling Without Wrestling that has 100 hours of audio on it. That's all downloadable. You can put it on your phone, put it in your car, listen in your car. But I mean, that's a lot of audio. Hundreds of pages of handouts. I made it free about 6 months ago. I used to be $50 a month, and I just decided to make it free. So that's been fun. I've had a lot of people sign up for that. Actually, I'll show you that real quick. Let's see. If I go here, and here. All right, so Oh yeah, so that's the member page. Let me go to the pitch page here. Let's see. That's my Sid Walker website. That's got all the books. That's got some coaching. That's sidwalker.com. And actually, I'm going to go back. Let me go back here. This is easier. Bear with me. If I click web, this automatically opens up the right page. There we go. So this is my pitch page, I call it. So go to sellingwithoutwrestling.com and then go up here to the top. It says unlimited free trial, or down here free access. So any place where it says free, click on there. That will take you to an opt-in page. Name, email, etc. And then you've got a username and password you can get on anytime you want. So again, and this is what the actual site looks like here, members only area. So these are the main buttons. Core training, there's a $1,000 course on here. A lot of people really like that course. It's 6 hours. Good overview of the financial services business. Supplemental training. That's really a lot of my latest and greatest top webinars on lots of different things. Client interviews. I've had some people. There's like 16 of them here. Those are kind of testimonials for me, but I've had a lot of people go through all of them and say they learned a lot listening to other people. A lot of these people make $1 million a year or more. All those folks do right there. So live coaching, those are some sessions that I thought were particularly interesting that I put on there. 10 years of newsletters, I think it might be 8, can't remember now. Industry interviews, and then the handout archive is just hundreds of pages of handouts. So anyway, big resource. So check that out. All right. And you can see I've got 7 books on Amazon. You can see all those down there as well. My coaching philosophy, in the financial services business, whether it's life insurance or investments, I mean, the failure rate's 97%. I mean, some people tweak it a little bit, but it's really high. And then, of course, small business failure is 80%. So, I mean, that's one of my claims to fame is I've got a 97% success rate with coaching. I mean, I get a few people. I get hired by a lot of career changers. A few of those people go back to their old job. But most of the time, I'm really good at helping people figure out a way to make whatever they're trying to do work. Whatever the job is. Again, like I said, most of my clients are financial advisors. And there's a few keys to that. What I found always works is if you're helping people do what they need to do in a way that fits their values, there's going to be progress. Too many coaches today are teaching a system of some kind. I mean, that can work, but the problem is when you're teaching a system, that usually only works 10 or 15% of the time. I've had a lot of people hire me that have already spent a bunch of money on a particular system, or they say, I've spent a bunch of money on a coach or a couple of coaches or whatever it happens to be, and it just hasn't got me what I wanted. And I say, well, are they teaching a system? Well, yeah. I mean, that's okay. There's value in every system, of course, but that's really not what is going to guarantee success, because whatever you're doing needs to feel right to you. And if it doesn't feel right to you, you're not going to do it. So that's the problem with somebody else figuring out a system. There's going to be parts of anybody's program you're not going to relate to. So I'm big on making sure every critical aspect of the sales process feels right to you, or we get it to feel that way. Because if you can get in front of the right people, and you're a good interviewer, and you're good at helping people make educated decisions that feel right to them, you're going to do really well in the financial services business or any kind of service. Okay, here. All right, logistics. I usually don't have any trouble talking for an hour, so that I'll cut it off in an hour. I'll do a Q&A. I usually do a little bit. For years, I didn't do any Q&As. I've been doing them lately just for fun. So I'll hang around for a few minutes if somebody's got any questions, or if I think of anything else that I missed, I can throw it in there as well. But this will be like 99% content today. I do a quick pitch on my coaching, but that's about it. You can ask questions as you go. I'll try to answer them. You can try the Q&A. I don't like to respond to long emails. I mean, I can read them, I guess, but I don't like to write long emails. So I'd rather talk on the phone. So don't hesitate to call me. I'm very available. And if you don't hear me for some reason, let me know. One time I went for 5 minutes and kept talking before somebody said, I can't hear you. I actually pushed the mute button on my GoToWebinar. I didn't know you could do that. Found that out the hard way. All right. So let me see if I can do my next slide here. There we go. So this is kind of some of my usual stuff. I mean, lots of you have heard this before. Two basic approaches to selling. You've got the client controllers. Basically, that's the traditional sales. That's, do everything you can to make a sale. That's, that the guy, the prospect's got your money in his wallet, and your job's to get it and do anything you can to get it. And, that's been going on forever, still going on. Most corporations still teach that. Now, if you're a relationship builder, it's very different. I mean, you basically don't want to be pushy or aggressive or controlling. You don't want to make people uncomfortable. You don't like conflict. You want to get along. You want to be friends. You don't want to wrestle. You want to connect with the client. You want good communication, and you want to feel good about whatever you do, and you want them to feel good. You want. I remember when I first got in the life insurance business. I remember I was in the party store one time in my hometown where I grew up, and I remember I walked in there, and I'd been in the life insurance business for a while, but I could I could feel some of the people moving away from me. It's like, oh yeah, get away from him. He's going to try to sell you some life insurance, So I mean, I hated that, So I've spent my good part of my career getting rid of that energy. In other words, it's like how do you be a trusted advisor rather than somebody people are moving away from, because they think you're afraid you're going to sell them something. All right. So anyway, the biggest problem today, you've got a lot of people that are much more sensitive to people. They care about people. They don't relate to the aggressive traditional style. So it affects your performance. I mean, if you don't have a way to do what you need to do, prospecting, closing, asking for referrals in a way that fits your values, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt your production. So that's given me a job for, 30 plus, 35 plus years, is helping people figure out, because that's why there's a 97% closing or failure rate in a lot of sales jobs, and in the financial services in particular, is that unless you can figure out a way to do what you need to do, which is basically get in front of people, be a good interviewer, and then get people to make decisions. Unless you figure out a way to do that in a way that fits your values before you run out of money, you're gone. And most people don't figure it out. So I'm really good at teaching people how to do that in a hurry. I'm amazed at these 20-somethings that will find me and hire me. I had one guy 2 years ago hire me for 6 months before he went full time. He made over 100,000 the first year. So anyway, you get the idea that you want to make sure that your values and you're congruent. In other words, you want what you say and what you do, and your approach to selling all are congruent. They all feel right to you. And if they don't, again, your results are going to suffer. So I've got down here, the rules are different. Let me go to the next slide. It's related here. Yeah, so just some examples. Making appointments, for example, that's a big shift right there. If you're a relationship builder, your goal is not to make an appointment if you're on the phone. That sounds crazy, but you're actually, what I'm saying is you don't ever want an appointment unless someone is expressing some interest. If you're a relationship builder, you're not a turnaround artist. You're not going to go out and talk people into things. It's not what you do. So if there's no interest, don't bother. Of course, I try to be as hard to say no to on the phone as possible. My typical phone language is something like, typically what I do is I spend an hour with people. I'll show you what smart people are doing with their money. I'll answer your questions. I don't charge for this. There's nothing to buy at this point. Typically, I can make or save people thousands of dollars, often tens of thousands of dollars, just from this single meeting. Does that sound like that might be good use of an hour? I'm daring people to say no. That's a relationship approach. Very different. Let me stop by and show you the kind of work I do. I mean, that puts people to sleep, or they just, it's a joke. That worked in the 70s. It doesn't work today. People are too busy, or they'll just hang up. Closing's another great one. Again, one of my claims to fame is my average client's got a 90% or better closing ratio without using any sales technique whatsoever. You absolutely do not need it. The worst thing you can use if you're a relationship builder is sales technique. People will look at you like, what are you doing? You lost your mind. You want to be a trusted advisor. Trusted advisors don't do sales technique, period. So that's another big change. It's like, how do you have a high closing ratio? Is from interviewing. It's basically a combination of interviewing and teaching. Asking for referrals is another classic. I mean, you've got so many, it's an epidemic. Asking for referrals is a money printing machine, but majority of people don't ask. because they've been taught you're supposed to go out and demand referrals or expect referrals, which is ludicrous. If you're a relationship builder, the last thing you're going to do is put somebody under pressure to get names from them. However, some of your clients will be willing to help you. So you need to have an approach. I just did a seminar on that a couple months ago for WebEx. It's on YouTube. Look up Sydney Walker on YouTube, Sidney, and you'll see I've got 4 or 5. I have like 7 or 8 on there. So there's 100 hours on my website, but there's also a bunch on YouTube. But my latest, I did a thing on referrals a couple months ago that's very comprehensive. So check that out. So anyway, you get the idea. When you shift away from traditional selling, you're not pushing people. You've got to get on their side, and you've got to show them that you're on their side and continue to do that throughout the relationship. All right. So keys to success. Getting appointments, I've kind of said this already, but this is a good slide just because it kind of leads into where we're headed here. Getting appointments with the right people, getting people excited about working with you. I'm really good at those 2 things. Helping clients make decisions that feel right, that's interviewing. I guess those are kind of the 3 areas I'm typically focusing on. Can you get rid of your call reluctance? Can you get rid of anything? Can you get fearless on the phone? Basically, I think I'm probably as good as anybody in the world on that one. I've got the #1 book on overcoming call reluctance on Amazon. And then, getting people excited about, working with you. That's an interviewing process. There's a lot of that on my website. Helping clients make decisions that feel right. To me, that's such an important part of the whole process. In other words, in order to be a trusted advisor, you've got to give up control of the client. You've got to basically give them total control and total veto power, which your average client controller can't do. They're never going to give that up. So there's a big distinction there. And then managing your thoughts. I was thinking about what I wanted to do on this webinar today, and just decided to go a little different route because I've got so much information, both free on the internet, with the first 3 topics there. And the 4th one, though, managing your thoughts and your attitude and your focus, because that's why I titled this, How to Make $1 Million Annually Using the Low-Key Approach, because I've helped a lot of people go from 100,000 or more, maybe somewhere in that lower 6-digit range to over $1 million of income. And what made them get up over $1 million of income is not what you think. Most of it is psychological, because it's not that hard to be good at getting appointments and getting people excited about working with you and being good at interviewing. That's all very teachable. The part that's the most challenging is what are you doing? What's going on between your ears? How are you managing your thoughts? What's your attitude? What's your focus? So that's what we're going to talk about today. It's kind of like, what is the attitude that causes people to go from 100,000 a year to $1 million or more? I have a few clients that are breaking the 2 million mark. So that's pretty amazing because the people that are doing that, they all started out making 100 grand a year like everybody else, or less in some cases. Those are my best success stories. The people that were ready to quit, that are making over $1 million a year. Those have made me semi-famous. So anyway, especially because all of them are with big companies. It's kind of an interesting achievement. So anyway, that's where we're headed here. So how do you manage your thoughts, your attitude, your focus? So our biggest problem, and people, the ego. People think they know what the ego is. Most people think that your ego is kind of a sense of self-esteem or self-worth. People say, oh, he's got a big ego. He thinks a lot of himself or that kind of thing. And that's true, but that's like a tiny part of the ego. And this is the spiritual definition of the ego, not the clinical definition. There's nothing I'm going to talk about today that isn't at least 10,000 years old, literally. And it's written down in books that are that old. This stuff is as old as the hills. It's the fight between the ego and the spirit, and it's going on. It's bigger than ever, But basically, the ego is the source of all negativity. It's the source of all suffering. If you really let that in, what a nasty piece of work. Okay, it's way worse than you think. And there's some positive parts, but not very much. I mean, if you could get rid of all suffering, get rid of all negativity, all suffering, I'd get rid of the ego in a hurry. And that's really kind of one of the things I'm trying to do in my life at this point. And so so how does the ego get created? I mean, that's a fascinating topic. We could spend a bunch of time on that, especially from a spiritual perspective. Again, this is thousands of years old, lots of different explanations. But basically, that's for another time. We don't have time to get into all that today. And I've written books about it and touched on some of that. So we'll talk about that later. But basically, when we're born, the impression is that we're alone, we're helpless, and we need to survive. And so, the ego gets created in there. It wasn't always there, but let's just say for this discussion, it's just a naturally kind of part that evolves. We absorb that from our parents, that kind of approach to life. When we start to watch what seems to work, what doesn't work, we start to watch what other people think about us. A lot of the ego is a collection of what people think about us, which is fascinating. So the ego collects all this information. A lot of it is misperception. The ego basically wants you to think that it has all the answers to the problems in life because it's figuring everything out. But it basically is totally separated. I mean, the ego got created basically out of fear, so it has this drive to survive. It's kind of disconnected itself from higher intelligence, basically. So it's on its own. So it's obsessed with survival and control and dominance. I mean, and that's the essence of the ego. It's the survival of the fittest. It's, how much power can you get? How much favor can you get in your own court so that you make sure that you're gonna survive. And so the ego is constantly taking in information to judge and evaluate. Is what's happening dangerous? Do I need to stay away from this? Or is this okay based on the information I've collected? And one of the big problems with the ego is about half the information is misperception. In other words, if you ask 10 people what just happened in a car accident, if you're walking around 10, say 20 people saw it and you talk to 10, you're going to get 10 different descriptions of what happened. And that's the problem with the ego. Pretty much everybody's got a different description about how life works. So which one is it? Which one works? The problem is most of them don't work very well. It's not based on truth, which is a whole different thing. The ego is not into truth. The ego is into what it observes to happen in the observable world, let's call it. The observable proval. The whole academic system is very ego-driven. Everything needs to be observable and provable and basically fit linear logic. That's the majority of our academic system. So you got the ego collecting all this information, judging and evaluating, is telling you everything you're doing wrong. I've got a lot of great golfers as clients, club champions, a lot of guys from the insurance business. And I had one guy tell me one time, I've had clients for 20 years. All those guys could teach the course. But I had one guy tell me one time, he said, that basically, if you hit the ball in the woods, your ego couldn't hit a golf shot if it tried. It has no experience of anything. All it does is watch film. But if you hit the ball in the woods, it's going to tell you for 20 minutes, everything you did wrong, based on the film that it's taken. So, it gets kind of fascinating because your ego couldn't actually hit the golf shot, but it will tell you everything you're doing wrong. And so that's a lot of what's going on. And that has a huge, in fact, in sports, the ego is a constant problem, but it's a constant distraction. I've been playing. I took a couple of years off. I play a lot of tennis, and I've been working on my serve. I start a doubles league tomorrow night, and so I've been working on my serve. But it's just always amazing because the serve in the tennis is one of those things. If you want a good serve, you don't get to see it. In other words, you basically throw that ball up, and if I look to see how I did before the ball's over the net, I can hit the tape on the top of the net 20 times in a row. If I don't look, the ball goes in. That's my ego. My ego wants to see how I'm doing. Man, it's just so tenacious and so stubborn. It makes you realize, what we're up against to try to overcome that ego. Man, it's a tough cookie. So anyway, then just take that into your own life. Your ego's it's a life or death deal. Your ego's trying to survive. It's not casual about what it wants you to do. So again, that's if you want to grow, you've got to get past your ego. There's no way around it, because the ego's going to keep you doing what you've always been doing. Because anything that's worked up to this point, if you're still alive, that's okay with the ego. Even if what you're doing doesn't work, that's okay. The ego wants you to keep doing it. I'm sure some of you heard that expression. It works so well, I quit doing it. Guess what? That's the ego. The ego doesn't like the unknown. The ego doesn't like things working that it doesn't understand. So it'll keep looking for something new that's more predictable. So it's an amazing piece of work. Let me tell you, when you start to study the ego, it's like unbelievably complicated. And most people are, totally absorbed in that reality. I used to think being analytical was the issue. That if you could be less analytical, but it's really the ego combined with being analytical that really gets the grip around our neck. That's the ego combined with the intellect that really is tricky. I got a guy working, a real estate guy in Pismo Beach I'm working with. He's got 150 agents, young guy, or young to me, he's 35, and he's doing really well. We were talking the other day, and he said, "Well, so I woke up this morning." He said, "My ego said, you failed before, and you're going to fail again." We started laughing and went, "Wow, that was inspiring." That's what your ego sounds like. Your ego, no matter how successful you are, will come up with stuff like that out of nowhere. So let's see here. What else should I say? So the ego is judging and evaluating. I mean, prospecting is a way to really see what your ego's like in action. I mean, if you get ready to get on the phone, your ego hates rejection. Basically, here's some characteristics of the ego. It wants to be rich with no effort. It wants to be entertained, live a life of luxury and privilege, wants to be right about its information that it's collected, and it gets very upset if anybody challenges that information. It wants to teach people a lesson if you have the audacity to disagree. And it'll fight, for what it believes is true. And it's a life or death issue in some cases. So that's why you can see people get pretty intense they're really in that ego mode. Now there's other modes you can be in, which is what we're going to talk about today. But if I'm getting ready to get on the phone, of course I coach people on this all the time on the prospecting. I mean, your ego's brilliant. It's been around for thousands of years. It knows every trick in the book. It's always trying to get in there. It's always trying to get you from taking any kind of risk. So you're getting ready to pick up the phone. Your ego is going to, I don't know if this is the best time to phone. I'm not sure you got the right language. These leads aren't that good. Doesn't seem like anybody's interested in this stuff. You sure is this the right job for you? That's the ultimate. I mean, I've been coaching for close to 40 years. My ego still thinks I'm in I should go out and get a regular job. My mother used to say that to me. What's coaching? Why don't you go get a real job? So anyway, but or if I look at a person's name on my database, I've got 40-some thousand people in my database, and I'll look at a person's name and maybe I'll see a designation or I'll see an address or something. My ego could make up a whole story about that person with tiny bits of information about what this person's like, or based on what their designations are, or any notes that I have. And so I have all this scenario, and oftentimes it's, you don't need to call that guy. He looks successful. That's my ego. And then of course when I call him, none of that's true. I work with one of the biggest producing clients I've ever worked with last summer, $5 million a year, and I wasn't going to call him. I went, what could that guy possibly want from me? That's my ego talking. And I knew a couple of guys that knew him. So anyway, long story short, we ended up talking. And he said at one point, he said, you sound like a good guy. He says, I've already got 4 coaches, but heck, let's make it 5. So we had a great time. I was helping him with his interviewing. He said he was missing some sales he didn't think he should miss, and so we had some fun doing that. But I mean, that was one of the experiences of a lifetime. And my ego pretty much thought it was trying to convince me I was crazy to make that call. So, you can't listen to your ego. Your ego's pumping the brakes all the time. Your ego does not. It hates risk. It hates change. It hates the unknown. It hates rejection. And it's basically trying to keep everything the way it is. Now, the ego doesn't mind if you change jobs, change towns, change wives, change spouses. As long as you end up doing the same thing with a new group of people, it's okay. So that's how brilliant your ego is. Okay, so that's what we're up against. So you're getting the idea. It's an amazing monster to deal with. All right, so this is a lot of my coaching these days, and this is how I've gotten people to up over $1 million. In other words, there's a point where everybody's got pretty good skills. I mean, they know what to do. They got a good closing ratio. They can get appointments with people, but it's like, how do you make the right business decisions? How do you do more what feels right? Because that's the smartest part of your brain, which I'm going to tell you in a second here. Your intuition is way smarter than your ego's ever going to be. So one of the key things is to realize you're not your ego. Most people don't know that. They think that negative voice coming through that's criticizing and is just part of who they are. That's like the first major thing you got to become aware of. You are not the ego. You are the chooser. You can choose the reality that you live in. The ego is just a set of tapes. It's kind of it's programming that's in your head. You don't need to do it. You can choose not to do it. You can choose a different approach. And so the bottom line of the whole thing here is that basically the ego is a formidable adversary. It's as smart as you are on your best day. It never sleeps. It knows every trick in the book. So you can't casually negotiate with your ego. It's going to win. But one of my biggest discoveries, again, in 40 years of coaching, is if you ignore your ego, it has no power. All you have to do is ignore it. Now, that sounds easy, and it is easy. It's incredibly easy, but it does take guts. I will say that. Everything I teach at this point is incredibly simple, but it does take guts, because it takes guts to let go of the illusion of the security blanket that the ego is presenting. Even though the ego really doesn't know what it's doing, it convinces you that it does, and when you start to move away from it and find some other source of answers, it goes crazy. And it'll do everything it can to pull you back in. So again, you're dealing with a very, very smart adversary here. All right, so I think that's, and let me give you, so if you're not being an ego, who are you being? So I'm calling that the intuitive spirit. There's lots of different names for it. You could call it who you really are. You could call it, who you're just being. In other words, who you are without your ego is who you really are. And I'm calling that the intuitive spirit. And there are trainings. The Landmark Forum. Spent a lot of time around Landmark off and on in my life. That's probably one of the most brilliant 3-day programs where you can go in for $500 and experience who you are without your ego by Sunday night. It's one of the most amazing things you could ever do. If anybody, put that on your bucket list, do the Landmark Forum. Unbelievable. It's in 9 languages. It's all over the world. One of the most amazing training things you could ever imagine. There's 4 basic courses. There's 2 to the forum, then there's the advanced course, and then there's the communication. So there's 2 tracks. The communication track is different, but it's just as brilliant. So anyway, highly recommend those. It's landmarkeducation.com if you want to check it out. And they don't advertise. It's all word of mouth. Okay, so you got the 2 basic choices, either an ego or an intuitive spirit. All right, so let's get to the intuitive spirit here, which is really kind of, how do you be more intuitive? There we go. How do you be more of an intuitive spirit? Well, you got to be intuitive to be more, So everyone's got intuition, even if you think you don't. I mean, you can't walk across the room and not use your intuition. There's a lot of different kinds of intuition, but basically it's the ability to process massive amounts of information in seconds. It's kind of like riding a bicycle. You learn to ride a bike kind of a piece at a time. Sometimes you fall a few times. Sometimes you luck out, maybe not. My daughter did that. But I remember I crashed and burned a few times riding a bike. I learned on a gravel road on a hill, took some disastrous falls. But at some point, the way the brain works is it takes all that information, it's pushing it over on the intuitive side, so that basically you can ride the bike with the single feeling of what it's like to ride the bike. Thousands, millions of pieces of information actually to go into riding a bicycle or just walking across the room. But you can do it just based on the feeling. So that's the ideal scenario. The analytical mind's kind of collecting the pieces, and then it gives them over to the intuitive side. The intuitive side turns it into a feeling. So you can do anything complicated with just a feeling. Could be riding a bike, could be typing. I type 100 words a minute. I don't know what the keys are anymore. I learned that in high school. I just type. I play music. I'm a keyboard guy. Same thing there. I don't even think about the keys I'm playing. I play with my eyes closed half the time. Dancing, cooking, anything sports related. Sports is a big one. We get to see that on TV all the time, and of course, if you play any sports. But there's all kinds of things in life that we do, where you get the feel for it and you do it. You don't think about it. That's intuition. That's one form of intuition. Um, the other types. My ex-wife, she actually manages money for about 80 wealthy people. Brilliant at it. Actually manages the money herself, and but she's very intuitive. She can walk into a room and tell you what's going on with everybody. Emotionally, I can't do that. I mean, I'm very intuitive, but that's beyond me. Whereas for a guy, if you take all the furniture out of the house and put it in the front yard, I can tell you if it's going to fit in the truck in 2 seconds and be right. Whereas my ex would have trouble with that. So women tend to be better with relationships and people, and guys tend to be better sports and mechanical things and figuring things out, and obviously there's lots of exceptions. There's people are complicated, so there's no general rule that applies to everybody. So so you get the idea. Sometimes people say to me, "Oh, I trusted my feelings, and everything just blew up. Everybody hates me." That's not intuition. That's emotion. When you're telling people what you really feel about them, that's not intuitive. Intuition is a very subtle kind of thing. I mean, it's so subtle, it's easy to miss. To give you a couple definitions, it's a sense of knowing that something feels right or doesn't feel right. It's a quiet sense of knowing. So that's very subtle. Another one I like, I don't know where this came from, internal promptings barely caught in the web of human consciousness. Internal promptings barely caught in the web of human consciousness. The still small voice, Gandhi used to describe the intuition as that. Another one of my favorites, the barely audible voice of heaven. Okay. So, we're talking subtle, as subtle as you can get. Your ego's loud, noisy, kind of obnoxious at times, very scared, kind of in a panic, whereas your intuition's very quiet. Now, your intuition can get loud if you're in danger. I've had my intuition, get pretty intense to get me out of danger at a time. But even then, it's still got a peaceful element to it. It's never panicked. Your ego makes you panic. All right. So you get the idea, because that's an important. A lot of people don't make a distinction between intuition and emotion. Even women a lot of times don't. I have a lot of women clients. They say that's the biggest problem. They have so many feelings, they don't make the distinction between intuition, which is coming from a higher state of mind, and emotion, which is usually a lower vibration. Also, emotions are usually more intense and they're more fickle. They change quickly. Intuition doesn't change overnight. It'll be there for weeks and months. When something feels right today, it's going to feel right tomorrow. It doesn't change. It may change over time, but it takes a long time for that to change. So it's very different in that regard. That's why you want to sleep on things. If somebody says to me, "Yeah, this looks good, let me sleep on it," I say, "That's totally fine. I understand." Because people want to see, if it feels right tomorrow, if it feels as good today as it does tomorrow, probably a good thing. Okay. So if you're closing and somebody wants to think about something, the one question I always add in a closing scenario, if somebody says, "I want to sleep on it," I say, "No problem. I do the same thing. When do you want to make a decision by?" And then don't say another word. Let them tell you. Don't offer them a month or 2 weeks. A lot of times people say, "Call me tomorrow, call me Friday, call me Monday." If something feels right to people, they don't need much time. They just want to make sure they feel the same way about it tomorrow or in the next few days. And that's really the way you want people making decisions. You want people making decisions that feel intuitively right to them, because then they're going to buy stuff and keep it, which is going to be great for your persistency. And anyway, I do a lot on that. That's all about the interviewing process. But all right, so you're getting the idea. Emotion's not intuition. That's a big one. Women have too many feelings. Guys are just glad to feel something. so anyway, if I can get guys to be more intuitive, they're pretty excited, because most guys relate to it in sports, which I'm going to talk about towards the end here. But it's about being in the zone. You can't play sports analytically; it's too slow. You get killed. I played a lot of ice hockey as a kid. It'd be a great way to get run over, thinking about what you're doing. All right, so I told you how subtle it is. So why trust your intuition? There's a couple things here. Probably the biggest one, and I could talk about this for hours, but basically the most important thing is the size of the database. Your intellect / ego works with your intellect. Your ego kind of likes the conscious mind, the intellect. It has a tiny database. It only can hold a certain amount of information. That's why you cram for a test. Because as soon as you get your conscious mind full of a certain amount of information, it starts dumping stuff out in order to make room for new stuff. It doesn't remember it very much. You take the test and you forget 90% of the material. You don't remember it. So it's good at remembering things for a short period of time, whereas your intuition has unlimited memory and unlimited storage and total recall. You can get at anything in your intuition. So the difference there, I'd like to say, the size of the database of the intellect/ego is about the size of a grain of sand, compared to, just to give you a comparison, it's actually much bigger than this. But let's just say the intuition size of the intuition would be all the grains of sand on all the 600 miles of beaches in Florida. How's that for a visual? That's a lot of sand. Okay, so the intuition basically has an incomprehensibly large database. Like I said, we could talk about that for a long time, all the different aspects. But that's one reason you want to trust your intuition, because it basically is way smarter than your intellect. And that's the only thing that's going to create real growth. The people that I've helped go from the 100,000 to a million, the only way you can get there is intuition. I'm sure you could probably figure something out, but basically the fastest way, let's put it that way, the fastest way to make progress is to be more intuitive, because you're operating with the smartest part of your brain. And here's the challenge. And why most people choose to be egos rather than intuitive spirits is that the intuition gives you the answer. When you ask your intuition an answer, or when you ask your intuition a question, it gives you the answer. It does not give you the paperwork. You don't get any proof, which the ego hates. You don't get any you don't get any linear logic. It just says go right, go left, say this, say that, and it's done. So one of the things that's required to be more intuitive is it requires a leap of faith to trust it. Because those are the two parts. First of all, you've got to get access to your intuition. The second thing is you got to have the guts to take action on it. Two big things. The first part's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to get access to your intuition. The second part is way more challenging, to have the guts to actually take action on it, because you have no proof it's going to work. And I'll give you a couple thoughts on that here. So the proof that's important is, in other words, and I've done this for 30 years probably, I've kept a log of every time that I've made an intuitive choice. So I have lots of proof about what happens when you trust your intuitive instincts. So I get my clients to keep a log. That's huge. But that's really where you get your confidence from, is remembering the intuitive choices you made and what happened. When you see the results, your intuition is usually always right. Maybe takes a while to find that out, but most people that are very intuitive would argue that easily. Because again, it's coming from a much more bigger database of information. The answers are way smarter and way sharper. So it's collecting those experiences, because your ego hates the intuition. The ego hates the unknown. It wants everything observable and provable, linear logic. So if you do something intuitive and it works, your ego wants to get rid of that memory as soon as possible. It can't erase it, but it'll fog it all up so you forget all about it. When I look at that 30 years of stuff that I've done intuitively, it's unbelievable. I look at that list and go, I wouldn't have remembered any of this, if I hadn't written it down. My ego would have just erased it all. Now, it actually doesn't erase it, but in other words, it covers it up so you don't see it. Because your ego wants to be in charge. The ego doesn't like the source of the intuition. That's an unknown. That scares the ego to death. So anyway, keep a log. All right. So let's give you a couple easy steps here. I notice I'm jumping around in my notes, but I'm covering those points in a different order. So let me give you kind of the way to get started, because I don't recommend making big decisions using your intuition if you don't have some practice at this. You can make some mistakes. Your emotions can get involved in there. You can fall in love with the deal. That happens all the time. People fall in love with the deal and they don't listen to their intuitive instincts, because their intuition's going, no way, don't do that. And your emotions are, how can that be? How can that not be the perfect thing for me? I'm sure you've all had that experience. I've done that more than 10 times myself. So it's more, it takes a little more awareness and a little more discernment, to be aware of what your intuition is really saying, and not just go with what your emotions want to do, because your emotions can get you in trouble, which that as well. So the thing is, I've got two questions, and these are exact. I'll send you an email later with these two questions, um, and these tap the intuition. These are not analytical questions, and I have people do these every hour, all day when I start working with them as a coach. One of them, the first question is, what does it feel like it's time to do now? Okay, what does it feel like it's time to do now? There's no should in there. There's no right way to do it. You're just asking your intuition a question. What does it feel like it's time to do now? Something pops into your head, you ought to consider doing it because it's coming from the smartest part of your brain. Like in interviewing, one of the things you'll notice, I mean, I love interviewing. I really love teaching it. Uh, and one of the things I teach people is when you're sitting in an interview asking questions, certainly you've got your list of stuff that you're choosing from, some of it intuitively. But if you have a question that pops into your mind in the middle of an interview, that's often the most important question in the whole interview. And if you're being an ego, you swat it away as an errant thought. If you're being more aware, you make sure you ask that question because a lot of times that'll be a turning point in the interview. It could take off in a whole different direction, and you'll end up making a sale in some other area. That's happened to me many times. So there are no errant thoughts. I mean, when your intuition's watching all the time, it's brilliant. It sees way more than you're ever going to see. As one of my mentors said, your intuition is going to give you the best possible answer, all things considered. All things considered, it processes millions and millions of pieces of information per second, and gives you the answer. Your intellect can't even. I mean, your intellect would blow up trying to do that. It can't even hold a candle to that. And that's the same in sports. That's why in sports there's no limit to how good you can get at anything if you can feel or see what you're trying to do. If you can get the feel for something, you can do it. I've coached a lot of different things. Skiing in particular was a really fun one. The same kind of thing. Get people to anyway. That's another whole discussion. But anyway, you're getting the idea here. So you got the two questions. Did I give you the second question? So one was, what does it feel like it's time to do now? Second question is, who does it feel like it's time to call now? That's a powerful one. I have people that go through their whole day just doing those two things. Obviously, you got stuff scheduled, but you can just be intuitive all day and just, what does it feel like it's time to do now? Who does it feel like it's time to call now? If somebody pops into your head, I will guarantee you half the time you call them, they'll go, oh, I'm glad you called. I was just thinking about you. All right, or glad you called. I got some issues I got to discuss. Life is way more magical than we realize. The ego makes us figure it all out. And that's kind of a joke because the ego thinks that it can understand everything. And you can't. Life is way beyond our comprehension. We can figure certain parts of it out, but we haven't even scratched the surface in terms of figuring things out. I mean, that's one of my favorite stories is to show the audacity and the stupidity of the ego and mentality is they were going to close the patent office in the late 1800s because they thought everything had been invented. I mean, let that in. That's how bizarre the ego is. The ego actually, most people operating as an ego decided that, hey, everything's been invented. What else could there be? In the 1800s. Unbelievable. So that's, again, just to remind you, that's the part you're listening to determine kind of how do you do to your life. The part that wanted to close the patent office. All right. The other part, I mean, I'm kind of alluding to it, but we're obsessed with figuring everything out because of the ego. One of the greatest ways to free up all kinds of mental energy is don't figure things out unless it feels right to do so. It's huge. Your average guy complicates everything to death and is constantly trying to figure everything out. That's so much slower and inept than being intuitive, which basically is, does it feel right to figure it out? No, don't bother. If the answer is yes, then do the due diligence, do the analysis, whatever. Because there are things you need to figure out. There's nothing wrong with that. But basically, the intuition and your analytical mind are two different parts of the brain, right brain and left brain. Basically, they're meant to work together. They're meant to work as a team. And most of us use the analytical mind combined with the intellect or the ego for everything. Another one of my analogies that I love is, and this is like, if you're going to go on a trip across country, and you're gonna use your intuition, which would be the equivalent of Google Maps, has unlimited ability to see everything, down to a mailbox in the backyard, to all the stars in the universe, or not all the stars, but a bunch of the stars in our nearby here, let's call it, the galaxy. Or you can do, and then you need your analytical mind, which is a magnifying glass. Most people are using the magnifying glass to go through life, not Google Maps. And you need both. And you need a lot more Google Maps, because the other way I would say it, if I was speaking, I used to speak a lot in public, and I would say, if you're all intuition, you have a tremendous sense of timing and direction, but you may have trouble getting things done. Whereas if you're all analytical, you may be really good at getting things done, but you may be doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. You need both. And again, that's a key. Everything I'm telling you is how I've seen people go from 100 grand to $1 million a year in income. It's not all just selling skills or marketing or, buying the right list or being lucky or whatever your ego thinks is the case. It's the stuff I'm talking about. All right, here. Okay, so I think I covered everything on that. We're doing okay time-wise here. I've got enough time to give you my formula. I wrote a book last summer. I've had so many breakthroughs in the last couple of years with my coaching clients. I mean, just unbelievable stuff is happening. So I decided to write another book. I've got, like I told you, got the #1 book on overcoming call reluctance, fear of self-promotion, and increasing your prospecting. I have a lot of people saying it's the best book they've ever read on prospecting, period. But it's very psychological. It's very much about how do you get yourself in the zone or in the mood to make the calls. And that's another whole story I could tell, but let's stick with this one here. So living in the zone. I had so many breakthroughs in the last couple of years. Last summer, I had to write a bunch of them down, because what I realized was I've been in the zone a lot in my life. I mean, and you all know what that's like when you're in the zone. It's like it's amazing focus and feeling, kind of when you're doing something that oftentimes you're good at. Sometimes it's the first time, but oftentimes you're good at something where you just have total confidence, no thought, no doubt, no worry, no anxiety, no thinking. Basically, you just know what to do and you're doing it, and you're just having the time of your life. It's a total thrill. It's a joy to do. I think of many examples in sports for me. And then also, I spent 10 years as a lay monk. Lay monks mean a lay monk in a monastery run by women in California. How's that for a combination? Amazing people, smartest people I've ever been around. I did that for 10 years. You keep your money in your job and everything, but you spend all your free time there. They had a lot of property. The guys were always fixing stuff. They had a whole city block in Long Beach, and they had a big place up in the mountains. So a lot of the monks were contractors. So we did some fairly dangerous work, and we did everything but pour concrete. There wasn't anything we didn't do. So that was the other place where I really learned to be in the zone, because they would teach you how to stay in a high meditative state all the time when you're working, because you're smarter, there's less accidents, you get more work done, you're not as tired. I mean, it's an amazing experience to have somebody kind of help hold you in that higher state of mind. So that's when I started to realize, sports, being at the monastery, being in a higher meditative state. I mean, okay, being in the zone. And then for some other sources, well, basically, I just said, well, why not? Why don't I, be in the zone all the time? And then what went on for that was, well, why not teach people to be in the zone at work? So that's what I've been doing in recent years, is both practicing that myself and learning that, becoming an expert on how do I stay in the zone at work, and then teaching people to do it. That's always the best way to learn it, of course, right? Teach people how to do it. Teach what you want to learn most. That's the more flattering way to say that. But so anyway, here I am teaching people how to be in the zone, and that's really the way to be in the zone. You have to block out your ego, because your ego is keeping you out of the zone all the time. Your ego hates the zone, because the zone is an unknown. When you're in the zone, you're connected to your higher self. You're connected to your intuitive self. You're tapped into the universal database, massive amounts of information. Some would call it spirit. Some would call it God. Whatever you want to call it. It's big, and it's good, and it knows what it's doing. I actually said to somebody the other day. I said, God's pretty smart. So anyway, but if you get so there's a whole different reality that's been sitting there. The other thing that some people say, the original reality we were given was the zone. In other words, the original reality we were given was peace, love, joy, and abundance with no opposite. Peace, love, joy, and abundance with no opposite. That is the zone. That was the original reality we were given, and then somewhere along the way, negativity happened, and we've been stuck since. We have not been able to overcome the negativity, but it wasn't there in the beginning. That was not part of the original deal. That came later. So that's a whole another interesting conversation. And of course, a lot of my coaching uh, is getting people basically to start to see that other reality because it's sitting there. That was two of my biggest breakthroughs in coaching have been one to learn to ignore your ego, because when you ignore your ego, it has no power, and then to realize there's another reality sitting right there next to the ego reality, which has no negativity, and that's the zone. There is no negativity in the zone. And there's two other parts of the zone that are just unbelievable. Is that when you're in the zone, in that place that we're describing, and you can do it all day. The head woman at the monastery used to say you can hold your high as long as you want, which what she meant was you can maintain the zone as long as you want. You can stay there as long as you want. But there's two things about being in the zone that are just outrageous. One of them is you're perfect the way you are. What's that going to do to the self-help movement? In the zone, you're perfect the way you are. There's nothing to fix. Man, what a relief. You can relax. And the second one, which is even more outrageous, is you cannot fail. So in the zone, which is the original reality we were given, you're perfect the way you are and you can't fail. That doesn't mean everybody buys, but you're going to make lots of money if you make an effort. Anything worth any worthwhile endeavor, you're going to do fine. All right. Well, anyway, you get the idea. I'm very passionate about this. I could talk about it for days, and it's amazing. So let me give you, if you're fascinated with this stuff as I am, let me give you some resources here. Let's see what we got. Coaching. I'll get, so the coaching thing, I mean, obviously I'm still doing lots of one-on-one coaching, and then I'm doing some webinars. I don't travel to speak anymore. I told you a little bit about the coaching in the beginning, but if that's something that's of interest to you, certainly let's talk some more. It doesn't cost anything to find out if we'd be a good match for a coaching project. Again, I think one of my greatest strengths is I'm really good at getting to know people and helping them find their way, find their intuitive way to whatever it is they're trying to do. In other words, it's not about me teaching people how to do it. It's about me helping people figure out what feels right and getting them to risk doing that. That's what moves people to the $1 million mark. And not that you need to make $1 million. $1 million to you might be 300 or 500. I mean, I got clients that make $300,000 a year in a small town. You know, they're one of the richest people in the town. So it kind of depends on where you live. If you live in New York or San Francisco, I mean, you almost have to make $1 million. So the way prices are going these days. So anyway, coaching, everything's got to feel right to you. I'm really good at getting the conflicts out. I'm really good at helping people get on a roll, get in the zone, because that's the stuff that really has the staying power. You know, when you basically can become unstoppable. That's the way I signed my book, the In the Zone book. I say this book will make you unstoppable. And I think probably the other thing, if you were to interview 100 of my clients and say what was the biggest thing they got from me, I think confidence would probably be the big word. I'm really good at teaching people how to be more confident, and not from a puffed up ego standpoint, but I'm talking about from a very grounded, intuitive standpoint. Those are 2 books. I have 7 books on Amazon. One's a novel. 6 books are nonfiction. If you go to Amazon and go do the category books and then type in Sydney Walker, they'll show up. If you type in Call Reluctance, the Call Reluctance book will show up. It's the number 1 book there. But that's the number one, my number 1 seller there on Overcoming Call Reluctance, which I wrote 3 years ago. And then the Zone I wrote last summer, not this summer, but last summer. They're both on audio, which I've never done before. I mean, of course, I've done audios, but I put both of those books on audio. My other ones are not. So I know for a lot of you that's important to be able to get the books on audio. So check those out. And then the other ones, and then I told you where my website is. And by the way, if you want to order How to Double Your Sales by Asking a Few More Questions, don't order that on Amazon. Order that on sidwalker.com. That's the only book I haven't transferred to Amazon. How to Double Your Sales by Asking a Few More Questions. That's my biggest selling book. That's been around a long time, but I still sell a ton of those. But if you want that, order it on sidwalker.com, because then I just send it to you myself. Everything else will take you to Amazon. All right. Let's see what else we got to do here. I think I've covered about everything. I've covered books, so thanks. I've got phone number, email address, my calendar. I'll send you a calendar link, It's on my email. If you've got emails from me, send me an email if you want it. I'll send it back. If you want to talk for a few minutes, that's the easiest way to set up a time. And then I think I'm right. I mean, how about that? I mean, it is exactly on the hour. So I'm going to end here. I'll stick around for a Q&A, but I want to, I mean, I know some of you have to run. And thank you for being here today. This is an honor to be able to share this information with you. This is my passion, my life's purpose, to teach people how to get on a roll and get in the zone and maybe make some more money. So hopefully you got some stuff you can go out and try today. To me, that's always my evaluation of good coach. You know, how fast can they do good things for me? So anyway, glad you could make it, and holler if I can help, or if there's a question I didn't get answered, don't hesitate to call me. All right. So I'm going to end there, the official portion of the webinar.